Hi, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Kayla, and you're listening to the Cheat Sheet Speech podcast, where two pediatric speech language pathologists talk about how to build communication in your everyday routines.
Before we dive in, just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. If you have concerns about your child's communication, we recommend seeking an evaluation from a speech language pathologist that is licensed in your state.
Great. So, Carrie, what are we chatting about today?
Today we're diving into one of the questions that we get asked the most. What should I do if my child isn't talking yet?
Yes, and if you're listening and feeling worried about your child's speech, you're not alone. This is one of the most common questions parents bring up, and today we're going to walk through some of the first steps that you can take. Let's get into it.
All right, so that first step is pre-linguistic skills. So I want you to check for those pre-linguistic skills.
That's great. So what do you mean by pre-linguistic skills?
Yeah, so these are the skills that develop before your child says their first word. These early behaviors give that foundation for understanding how and why we communicate. If you don't see some of these early behaviors, that could be a signal that you should consult a child specialist.
That makes sense. So what are some of the pre-linguistic skills that you usually look for?
So one of the first things we look for is responding to sounds. So for example, do they turn their head when they hear a parent's voice or a new noise entering the environment? We see this usually at about 3 months. Then by 5 or 6 months, are they responding differently to those different tones of voice?
Yes, so that would be like if you sing or you're using a happy voice, is your baby smiling or laughing? And then if you give them a certain no, do they pause?
Right. Yes, exactly. So, and then after that, around 7 to 9 months, babies can now locate the source of the sound, even if it's out of sight. And by that time, then when they reach 10 to 12 months, they're starting to listen with more purpose behind it, demonstrating understanding of what someone is saying to them, like waving when someone says bye-bye. So more associating those words with something.
Right, exactly. So all of these little steps, like the turning to noise, locating where it's coming from, reacting to your voice, they tell us that a baby is not only hearing, but also actively listening to how communication works.
Right. So if we don't see these early hearing and listening skills, you should consult your pediatrician. They can screen your child's hearing, and then if needed, they can refer you to a specialist, which we call an audiologist.
Yes, and it's important to emphasize that frequent ear infections can actually impact both hearing and language development. So make sure you're monitoring those in your baby and bring up any of those concerns to your pediatrician as well.
That's a great point. So back to our pre-linguistic skills, we also look for a baby's facial interaction. So do they smile back when a parent smiles? Are they laughing maybe in response to something that you do, like peekaboo, for example? We typically see these interactions start around 6 months.
Yes, that's true. And then 9 months, we start to see more gestures, which can be an early sign of expressive communication before words develop. So these gestures could include pointing, reaching, or showing toys.
Yes. Lastly, I'm just going to look at those early play skills. So is your baby starting to explore toys? Are they banging toys together? Are they starting to engage in some of those turn-taking games like pat-a-cake? Do they engage in cause-effect play? Maybe knocking over a tower? What does that play look like?
Exactly. And to put those all together, if your child isn't talking yet, make sure you observe their pre-linguistic skills, like their response to noise, facial interactions, gestures, and early play skills. And if you have concerns in any of those areas, then the next step would be to consult a professional.
Agreed. If you have any concerns at any point, you should always just discuss these with your pediatrician because they can guide you to those resources that might just inform you on what to expect for your child's age in that area of development, but also we're going to provide you maybe with some more information on those professionals and just to give you some more resources to have in this area of child development.
Exactly. We just want to make sure you understand who all of those child specialists are and how they can help children as well, so that you can know when you're talking and having conversations with your pediatrician too. So as we mentioned, one other professional would be an audiologist to address any concerns with hearing, which can also impact language development. If you're noticing gaps in the other pre-linguistic skills, you can also go directly to a speech-language pathologist, which many families don't actually realize that.
Yes, I know. As speech-language pathologists, we don't just start working with children at that word level. We can work on those foundational skills as well, like we were talking about, those games with facial expressions. We work on those play skills. We work on those pre-linguistic skills.
Exactly. And if your child is under 3 years old, you might actually qualify for early intervention services through your state. So these are usually free or low cost, and they give you access to professionals who specialize in supporting young children's development. So if your child is 3 or older, you can also try to request an evaluation through your local school district. Right. And then also another resource would be private speech therapy, which could be an option if you're not going through the state.
Yeah, a speech-language pathologist is going to take that deeper dive into your child's communication development. So they're going to look at their social-emotional development, understanding and use of those gestures, those play skills, speech sound production, as well as that receptive and expressive language. So this will just give you a better idea of their strengths and weaknesses, and then that speech-language pathologists can help create a plan of care so that they can better support their development.
Yes, exactly. So we have speech-language pathologists as one resource. We also mentioned audiologists. Another great professional would be an occupational therapist, and they can help little ones in the areas of eating, sleeping, sensory processing, and even fine motor movements. Mm-hmm. They might also be on this early intervention team that is provided through the state that we mentioned before.
That's correct. So an OT, sometimes we call them, abbreviation for occupational therapist. They might help if a baby has trouble like latching or sucking from a bottle, starting solids, or a picky eater. The OT can work alongside that family to make that feeding skills safer and easier.
Yes, exactly. And then they can also support sensory needs too. As we mentioned before, if your child isn't responding to sounds, and then let's say you ruled out hearing as a factor for that, you might also want to consult an OT to help support their sensory processing too. Mm-hmm.
And they're really tuned into not only sensory, but also regulation. So they help babies with self-soothing, transitions between activities, and like that managed stimulation. So that can be very helpful for sleep and daily routines. That's another area that we ask about a lot in our assessment portions or evaluations. We ask about sleep because if a child's not getting a lot of sleep, that can dysregulate them during the day. It could decrease attention and engagement, which could ultimately have an impact on communication. We also do have a podcast episode on regulation that talks about the relationship between regulation and communication. So if you're interested in more about that topic, definitely check that one out.
Yes, that's a great point. And a great, we kind of nod a little bit over to what OTs can do in that podcast as well. Another thing OTs do work on those fine motor skills. They can also help focus on rolling, sitting, crawling, reaching or grabbing toys. They can help families with like positioning and activities to help build strength and coordination for your little one.
Another professional that can target those motor activities is a physical therapist. So a PT addresses gross motor movements like walking and jumping or crawling, or even just trunk control. So focusing on that trunk control to help them engage in play. We see that a lot in early intervention, that sometimes those play skills are impacted by difficulty sitting up independently. So they might be on that team of early interventionists in your state program. Another person on our early intervention team in South Carolina, so this might look different in each state or be called something different. We have early interventionists and service coordinators for that program for 3s and under. We call it BabyNet, but I know each state kind of calls it something else. What do they call it in Maryland?
We have infants and toddlers program.
Okay, so very similar, BabyNet, infants and toddlers. So we have these early interventionists, and they actually coordinate your plan of care. So they'll come in and do the eval first, and then look at your child's overall development and kind of see, okay, are they maybe having a little bit more difficulty with some like walking skills, or they have more difficulty in communication? And then they'll take those areas that they need more support in and reach out to those professionals. The early interventionists may also provide services just on overall development. So they might take some of those speech goals and some of those PT goals and some of those OT goals and just work on some of those more generally in a session as well.
That's perfect. Yes. And another professional would be a social worker. Sometimes they're on the team with the early interventionists and the other professionals on the state programs. Sometimes they're not. So it just depends. But their focus would not necessarily be on direct therapy with the child, but they're more focused on making sure families have the support and the resources that they need. So, for example, they can help connect parents to community programs or childcare or even like financial or housing resources.
Yes, our early interventionists kind of lean into this as well. So they might provide daycare coupons or access to diapers if that's something that your family needs as well. So, and again, like you were saying, those social workers can provide some counseling or managing systems like Medicaid. That Medicaid application is very long, so they can help with things like that, or just monitoring early risk factors that might impact the child's development. So let's say they start with communication, they would maybe monitor some of those other risk factors in the house or outside that home that could impact your child's development.
Yes, they're really awesome resources. So to wrap up, if your child isn't talking yet, we said try to look for those early pre-linguistic skills and then consult a professional if you have any concerns. The last piece would be to implement some language enriching strategies in your home. This way you can start promoting language development right away.
That's right. Implementing these techniques can encourage your child's communication skills at home. So what are some strategies? These parents are coming to us, my child is not talking yet. What are some strategies parents could be implementing?
Yeah, so obviously there are so many different strategies that we can use that have been backed by research to help promote language, but here are some ones that are kind of a little bit easier to use right away. One great strategy is self-talk during daily activities. Self-talk means that you're narrating what you're doing. So if you are pouring milk for your baby, you can say, I'm pouring milk. Or if you're putting your socks on and they're putting them on too, you could also say, we are putting on our socks. You could also use parallel talk, which is very similar, but in that way now you're narrating what your child is doing. So if they're pushing a car while they're playing, you could say, I push the car. These strategies give kids repeated exposure to words in the context right away.
I love both of those and use them all the time. Another is using verbal routines, the same words and phrases. You would say the same words and phrases over and over during familiar activities. So, for example, ready, set, go, or wash your hands. We want to build that predictability to help that child start to anticipate what's going to happen next and join in.
Yeah, I really love verbal routines because it creates less pressure on the child since it's something familiar and they anticipate what's coming next. makes it also kind of a game with language. Another strategy would just to be expand on what your child is saying. So if your little one is making noises, copy those noises and then add something new. So let's say they're doing around the dinner table, you could do yum, just to add a little context and word pairing it with what they're doing.
Yeah, reading is also so powerful. So look at those books together. Reading just has so much vocabulary, so you can point to pictures and talk about them. There's no need really to stick to that text to like word for word text on there. So you can just talk about what's going on in the pictures and exploring that. And then, as your child learns and grows, you can maybe add to more of that text.
That's awesome. Make it more fun. Books are the access to tons of language. And another way to do that too is to just incorporate songs and games, keeping your child engaged and playing with them.
Exactly. So that wraps up our chatter for today. So let's move on to our speech spotlight, which is another strategy that you can use to support early language development. We're going to talk a little bit about Parentese.
Yes. What exactly is Parentese?
It's when parents use a slightly higher pitch, slower tempo, and exaggerated intonation. For example, ball. I have a ball. Ball goes up, 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 slide down. But the thing about this Parentese is we want to make sure it's not confused with baby talk.
Yes, that's a good point. So what do you mean by baby talk then?
Right. So with Parentese, we're still using real words when interacting with our baby. For baby talk, that refers to simplifying sounds in the words so that the parent sounds like a baby. So for example, I want a little bit of water instead of I want a little bit of water.
Yeah, that's a good point. So baby talk, like for that example, you're changing the L to a W, kind of how a child might sound. Whereas Parentese, you should still include the real words and the real sounds. This way you're giving your baby a great model of language, but you're implementing the strategies of a slightly higher pitch, slower tempo, and exaggerated intonation so that it grabs your baby's attention. And this also helps them to kind of separate the different parts of language.
Exactly.
I actually just read something on parents ditching Parentese, I guess, for like more academic talk with their babies. I guess thinking that like it would make them smarter by using this academic talk.
Interesting. That is not the move.
Yeah, not the move. I agree. And that is because the research shows that Parentese actually boosts language development. Babies who hear more Parentese actually have stronger language by 18 months.
So why does Parentese work so well? That's because Parentese grabs the baby's attention. That sing-songy tone helps them hear the individual sounds of speech more clearly, which will build that foundation for words.
Yes, this is why little kids' songs are the way that they are, even if that means we can't tolerate them on repeat. But they're slower, repetitive, and catchy. They're made to help children learn language.
That's right. So Parentese is also just interactive. So when you use Parentese, pausing and waiting and responding, you're teaching that your baby that communication is that back and forth exchange.
Exactly. You're giving your baby space to understand how turn taking works in a conversation, the cause and effect of conversation.
Right. And a lot of times it can feel silly for parents. We get that a lot in our early intervention sessions. It might feel pointless to people who don't understand that there's a reason behind that, or there's research behind why we're using Parentese when we're speaking with a baby.
Yeah, it's definitely feels silly at first. I remember having to do like early intervention sessions in front of a supervisor.
Right.
And so super weird to be talking using Parentese. But you're right. Parentese is actually something that is used across cultures around the world in different languages. And that is because it's so foundational in how a child learns language.
There's research behind why we talk to babies, so lean into that, Parentese.
Yes, lean in. Let's jump on over to our communication countdown for today, which is just our top 5 strategies to enrich your child's communication at home.
I love it. Just a great little review on what we touched on in the chatter earlier. So take it away, Kay. What are our top 5 strategies?
Awesome. So we first talked about self-talk. That was the one where you narrate what you're doing. I am looking for my keys. I can't find them. Where did Dad put them? Talking about yourself, and it gives great models in the context for your baby. And then there's also parallel talk, which is now you're narrating what your child is doing in that moment while they're playing. I'm stacking blocks. I put them up, up, up. So your child can pair the words with what they're doing. Number 3, verbal routines. Think about those phrases that are super common. Ready, set, go. 1, 2, 3. Peekaboo. Thank you. Night, night. Those are repetitive and predictable, so it creates less pressure for your child and encourages them to jump in to fill in the blank. Number 4, keep those books alive. Keep reading to your child. Make them interactive. We want to make sure we're pointing out the pictures. We're talking about even just turning the pages. You can even sing a song with your book as well. And number 5, we talked about Parentese. Keep talking to your baby using that high pitch, that slow speech, and that intonation that's super interesting. Keep your child engaged.
I love that list. Those 5 are functional and easy to implement at home during your everyday routines for those little ones. So that's a wrap on our podcast for today. Like, subscribe, and leave any comments if you have any questions or any topics that you want us to cover. We'd be happy to cover them in our next podcast.
Love that. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.